The jury watched in tense silence as the judge's words sank into the room. No one, not the wealthiest, the most connected, could manipulate the truth here. The courtroom air felt thick, rooted in the reality that power could no longer hide behind procedures or protection. As proceedings wrapped, the bailiff called the court adjourned. The audience didn't stir. Each person lingered under the weight of what they'd witnessed. Reporters scribbled frantically, attorneys sank into their seats, and the judge quietly gathered her papers. Diddy remained seated, arms folded, his expression, unreadable in empire, unraveling before his eyes. Outside, the courthouse doors had become a portal to a media frenzy. News crews jockeyed for position, microphones and lights flashing. The world braced for what came next. Inside, though the moment belonged to the jury. They'd seen secret messages, audio that spoke of hiding and suppression, and testimony from someone who dismantled the facade from within. The defense had tried every move: obfuscation, delay, suppression, but the court had drawn its line firmly in the sand. Justice, not strategy, had prevailed. As spectators filed out, one whispered to the next, "This changes everything." And they were right. This trial had shifted from a legal battle to a reckoning not just for Diddy, but for every shadowy corner of power that believed it could operate in silence. Tomorrow would bring testimony. Cross-examinations. Today unearthed the truth. And today, the fortress of silence had cracked, and the world waited for it to fall completely. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving behind a hush that felt like a held breath. The stakes shifted overnight, from rumor to reckoning, from denial to undeniable. Journalists packed up, but their whispers carried beyond these walls. The messages, the audio, the witness, all had laid bare the machinery of control that had long operated in the shadows. Diddy rose to leave, flanked by his legal team. His steps were measured, his face still composed, but there was no swagger now, only the calculated calm of someone who knows the storm has only just begun. Outside, the cameras swarmed like vultures, capturing his departure, but his gaze stayed fixed ahead, refusing to meet the lens. In the corridors, spectators passed, processing what they'd heard. A young clerk, tears in her eyes, tucked the last piece of evidence into her case file. Lawyers whispered about next moves, but even they could sense that today's revelations would shift the scales irrevocably. Across the city, news alerts buzzed and minds scrambled to digest a trial that had stopped being about music moguls and started being about power and how easily it can be weaponized. At home, viewers reflected. A man once untouchable, now exposed. A justice system once pliable, now asserting its voice. A cultural moment that felt seismic, not scandalous. The boundaries had been redrawn, and nothing and no one would ever be the same. Tomorrow, witnesses would return, testimonies would continue, and defenses would mount. But tonight, silence reigned, the silence that follows truth laid bare. And in that quiet, the promise rang clear: no empire, however powerful, can endure forever when the light turns on. The hush after the judge's final words wasn't just silence, it was an awakening. Inside the courtroom, every script had shifted. Defense lawyers rearranged documents with urgency. The prosecution exchanged solemn nods, each aware of how today's revelations had tilted the balance. Outside, the press gathered in a frenzy. Live updates buzzed across social media. Court slams Diddy's attempts to suppress evidence. Surprise witness confirms destruction of surveillance files. Even as night fell, the story refused to quiet. Each headline, each retweet, carried the weight of this moment, a legal turning point loaded with cultural consequences. Inside the building's grand foyer, spectators trickled out, some visibly shaken. A father held his daughter's hand, explaining through tears, "See, honey, this is how truth works." Nearby, a reporter stared at the spiral-bound evidence packet, whispering, "This changes everything." Back in chambers, the judge reviewed transcripts by the glow of a desk lamp. She paused on the audio transcript, fingers tracing the words, "No phones. Get it done." Her gaze narrowed. She knew the next order would ripple far beyond these walls. Within Diddy's defense team, whispers turned to worry. They had bet on procedure, on delay, on shadows, but the court had refused to play along. Their leader, voice barely above breath, acknowledged to his colleagues, "We're past procedure now. This trial is in the open, no hiding." Meanwhile, the prosecution prepared its finishing acts. Key witnesses were lined up. Each carried new fragments, messages, video, testimony picking at the edges of a narrative defense had tried to contain. They weren't looking for dramatic twists. They were methodical, surgical, relentless. Across the hall, behind closed doors, victims and advocates watched with guarded hope. One woman whispered to her lawyer, "I didn't come here for spectacle. I came for this." Her voice was steady, jeweled with tears and conviction. As the gallery lights dimmed and the building emptied, the darkness outside didn't feel like night, it felt like a pause, a deep exhale, the kind that holds space for what comes next. Tomorrow, the curtains would rise again, and when they did, the echoes of today wouldn't simply fade, they'd define what came next. Evidence shattered, Power exposed. A trial transformed into a reckoning, and there, in that space, the truth unapologetic, unyielding, unstoppable waited patiently for its next chapter. The courthouse emptied late into the evening, but the hum of what happened today lingered like a living pulse. Inside the empty stands, dust motes floated in the shafts of light, each one a silent witness to the seismic shift that unfolded. The walls, once lined with leather and authority, now felt porous to the world truth had slipped through. Outside, a single street lamp flickered as night rain began to fall. Reporters gathered under awnings, their notepads damp, their eyes sharp. One side, shaking her head. This is what rolls over empires. Photographers angled for final shots of lawyers slipping out back doors, their briefcases heavier than usual. In a nearby diner, a barista muttered behind the counter, overhearing a discussion on the trial. It ain't just a case, it's a reckoning. Patrons sat hushed, coffee cups idling in front of them, each sip tasting of awareness. Conversations paused, reopened. The city outside shifted, subtly attuned to something larger unfurling. Emerging from the courtroom, a young associate for the prosecution whispered, "We hold the line tomorrow." The jury saw, they heard, they felt it. She looked toward the courthouse steps as the rain washed the stone floors. Somewhere inside, victims and advocates watched that same stone. Their hearts lifted. In the defense suite, tension had replaced confidence. Strategizing gave way to uncertainty. The attorney's clenched jaw gave off its own signal. The shield had cracked, the defense strategy unraveling. They'd weathered storms of procedure, but this was a storm of fact, of witness, of reckoning. Across witness waiting areas, exhausted voices spoke of nightmares and relief. One former insider, tearful and broken, said, "They made me feel worthless. They nearly succeeded." Another spoke of lamps and doors watched, of power misused. But tonight, as they walked out with cautious hope, their steps no longer trembled. In silence. Back in the courtroom's shadows, the judge's chambers sat dim. The transcript of today's audio lay open. Her pen hovered above it, a judge poised at a crossroads. Law, truth, and the weight of a public reckoning converged in her. Choice tomorrow. Then, a faint click of the recording device, a group text, a live news alert. The story wasn't ending, it was pivoting. Power had been exposed. Systems were cracking. The hush of the empty courtroom remained, pregnant with rupture and possibility. As the last echoes of chairs scraping faded, only one thing felt certain. This trial was no longer about one man on trial, but about an entire structure of fear and protection. And now, with every step toward tomorrow, that structure was toppling pillar by pillar beneath the gravity of unveiled truth. A lone janitor swept the courtroom floors, the rhythmic swish of the broom echoing in the emptiness and unsettling counterpoint to the storm that had passed. Every scrap of paper, every ejected witness, every digital file lingered not just on record, but in the atmosphere itself, marked in invisible ink upon the walls. Outside, the courthouse steps glistened with rain, each drop reflecting the flash of news vans' spotlights. Reporters huddled under umbrellas, their tweets and headlines racing ahead, a tide swelling before the next wave. Then the murmurs began. Next up, that mystery witness. Will Diddy's empire survive this? The judge's warning changed everything. Inside, the defense team regrouped, hushed and tight-lipped. Papers lay splayed across conference tables, faces drawn. It wasn't panic yet, but it was awareness. The trial had escaped their strategy. They were fighting a firestorm shaped by raw testimony, digital evidence, human voice. A former insider, once silent, now emboldened, sat on a bench near the prosecutor's suite. They'd given their statement today, felt the tremor of truth ripple through the room. Their hands still shook from adrenaline. Their eyes, heavy but clear. They whispered to the prosecutor, "No more hiding." The solicitor nodded, a quiet echo of purpose. In the judge's chambers, the transcript lay open, and she tapped her pen in measured thought. Tomorrow would bring jury instructions and closing arguments. But tonight, she sat under the weight of implications. Legal precedent, systemic reckoning, and a society watching power unravel in real time. Out front, a small group of vigil participants gathered beneath the courthouse porch. Activists, survivors, supporters, holding signs. Silence is compliance and truth demands accountability. They spoke softly into their phones, pledging to keep the pressure alive. This wasn't just a trial, it was a movement. And in the hush of that night, two things were unmistakable. Diddy's empire no longer stood invincible, not in a courtroom that had seen its recordings scrubbed, its inner circle confessed to clean-up operations, its reputation laid bare piece by painful piece, and across the world. From living rooms to city sidewalks, the hush that once protected power was shattering. The trial had become more than legal drama, it was the collapse of silence, the unraveling of secrets, and the possibility of justice. However, delayed. Edging into reality, the scene closed on that silent sweep of the courtroom floor to smotes. Dancing, but what lay ahead was no cleanup. It was exposure, accountability, an unraveling of an empire built in darkness. now caught in unfiltered light. A hush settled over the courtroom as evening shadows stretched across the tiled floor. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air remained electric charged with the anticipation of what tomorrow would bring. In the prosecutor's office, the team unpacked the day's haul, the forensic files, the audio tapes, the anonymous testimony. Their eyes were tired but unyielding. They spoke in low tones about timelines, cross-examinations, and whether they'd weaken their case by revealing it all at once. Yet beneath the exhaustion was resolve. They had fractured a fortress of secrecy at the defense table. An aide nervously thumbed through a folder of last-minute witness statements, searching for cracks. Around him, lawyers leaned in, silent and focused. They weren't yet defeated, but the atmosphere bristled with uneasiness, the kind that follows a punch landing squarely. The sudden click of heels echoed down the hallway as jurors filed out. Guarded by steely court officers, their expressions solemn, each face carried that same question. How much more remains? Some offered sympathetic glances to the prosecution, team silence, thanks for exposing the truth. Others straightened their posture, preparing for a long, late night of consideration. Back in chambers, the judge reviewed the day's transcript. Each word, each objection, each witness crescendo was etched onto the pages. The weight of her impending decisions pressed on her. What would be admissible? What would preface closing arguments? The precise wording of final instructions. And underneath it all lay a deeper concern. Had her courtroom become not just a venue for justice, but a crucible exposing an industry's rot? Downstairs, a support group for survivors waited in a small room, lit warmly against the night. Among them sat Cassie, Jaime, Chris, and others Annie's allies, bound by the same stories. Some spoke quietly about relief. Others trembled at the fear that tomorrow could bring retaliation. But one voice wrapped them all: hope. Every revelation, every file, every tearful testimony had chipped away at fear. Tonight, they could feel it. Out front, the murmuring reporters were replaced by quiet activists, now joined by local community leaders. They spoke of justice beyond this trial, of industry-wide reforms, survivor protections, an end to clandestine silencing. Their vigil was peaceful yet resolute, candles flickering in the dark. "We'll be back," they promised. Inside, a lone janitor returned to his sweeping as the chambers emptied. Its rhythm was soft but deliberate, a heartbeat in the silence. With every stroke, the courtroom emptied not of evidence, but of the heavy tension that had weighed on its benches. Tomorrow would bring another tide of testimony, cross-examination, strategic fights, but tonight, the echoes of truth were allowed to rest for a while, and so the early night drew on, draped in uneasy quiet. In every corner, judges' chambers, attorneys' rooms, survivors' circle, activists' circle, a single question simmered. Could this trial truly shatter the code of silence? The answer would come in time, but tonight had shown one undeniable thing. Once shadows are exposed, they never fully return. The hush of night wrapped around the courthouse, but inside Braille news was just beginning to unfold. Here's what tomorrow could hold. New testimonies are being lined up. Prosecutors hinted at calling former insiders and survivors who've been in the shadows. Each one could bring fresh damage to the defense or reveal unexpected twists. Defense strategy is shifting. Their plan to suppress key evidence has failed. Now, they're scrambling to find holes, challenging forensics, shifting blame, or recasting Diddy as a mere bystander. Expect high-stakes legal drama. Judge's tone has changed significantly. Her warning during today's proceedings wasn't mere gesture, it was a spotlight on decorum. Any stalling or intimidation from the defense side could trigger contempt charges or sanctions. Support network is mobilizing. Survivors and advocates continue to gather, both in solidarity and protest. Their presence outside the courtroom may pressure the system inside, ensuring this trial stays focused on truth and accountability. Media reaction is already roaring. The narrative has shifted from celebrity gossip to systemic abuse, suppression of evidence, and emboldened whistleblowers. Front pages tomorrow will likely spark public outrage and renew calls for reforms. Legal aftermath. If the court allows this digital trail and surprise evidence, it could set new precedents for handling tampering, whistleblowers, and survivor-centric witness testimonies. Tonight's stillness masks a brewing storm. Power structures are cracking, legal lines are being redrawn, and this trial is fast evolving beyond one man's guilt or innocence. It's shaping up to be a referendum on industry-wide accountability, survivor rights, and whether the justice system can break long-standing walls of silence. The next session promises to be the most pivotal, yet if you're tracking this, buckle up. It's not just courtroom drama, it's a cultural reckoning. As dawn approached, the courthouse stood silent but not still, its foundation now etched with testimony, digital trails, and broken silences. Behind its walls, a trial that began as another celebrity scandal had transformed into something far greater, a confrontation with decades of protected abuse, legal manipulation, and systemic fear. Diddy's defense sat fractured, outpaced by evidence and outflanked by shifting narratives. The prosecution stood steady, its case no longer reliant on spectacle but on cold, connected truth. And the judge who once presided over a celebrity trial now steered a cultural reckoning. Outside, candles flickered in vigil. Reporters whispered updates into cameras. Survivors embraced in quiet courage. And across the country, screens glowed. Late into the night, as millions watched history bend slowly, painfully toward justice. The trial wasn't over. But the silence was, and that, in the end, was everything.